welcome to day 2 of the Yes Subcommittee meeting. Just a few quick reminders before we get started. Again, we are recording this today and it is being live streamed. I think, James, at this point, we have all the PowerPoint presentations. If anyone has anything that they're going to be presenting today and you have not gotten that to James, please do so. We will again today have a public comment period at the end of the morning session. There's a sign-up sheet in the back. So if you'd like to provide comment, please sign up. One addition to our schedule today, we had a discussion on the genetic augmentation a bit yesterday and decided that we would pick that up again today. So we will visit about that again this morning. I do want to thank those folks who provided public comment last night, or yesterday afternoon. I appreciate the conversations and the opportunity to visit with you again at the end of the meeting. And one of the things that became apparent to me yesterday during both the conversations that I had with some folks from the public and during Danielle's presentation yesterday is that this is on me. Idaho did a poor job of relaying to this group some of the outreach and education work that we have been doing in Idaho. So I just want to take a quick minute to give you some of the highlights. I don't have 2022 compiled at this moment. I want to give you an idea of some of the things that we did in 2021, which are also very reflective of what we did in 2022. We will report those at the next spring meeting. So we had direct conversations with more than 500 homeowners, more than 900 site visits with campers. We trained 14 volunteers who spent more than 246 hours performing campground walkthroughs. We had 17 bear education trailer events in Island Park, Driggs, Ashton, and Idaho Falls, where we had conversations with more than 2,800 people. We produced videos, including living in bear country, recreating in bear country. These are housed on our IDFG website and at our Upper Snake Region Facebook account and on our YouTube channel as well. We've provided signage on proper storage of attractants to VRBOs and Airbnbs in the Idaho portion of the GYE. We've worked with businesses and homeowners to utilize bear-resistant trash containers, remove bird feeders, and educate them on how to properly store attractants. We continue to do an apple picking event every year in the town of Ashton, where we remove truckloads of apples from trees in people's yards. Those are some of those that are edible are taken to the St. Anthony Senior Center, and others are transferred to the Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center. Those are just a few examples of some of the things that we're working on, and that's my bad. I was negligent not sharing those yesterday, but I did want to bring that up here this morning. So I appreciate your comments and I appreciate the conversation again. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Frank Von Manen.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. This is our annual study team update on the status of the population. And then after that, we will continue with a short update on our demographic workshop we just held with our study team in the previous couple of days. First, I want to recognize the other members of our study team from the 8 federal, state, and tribal agencies that we're representing. We've had a pretty intense week so far, but it's been really good. We've accomplished a lot. Thanks to everyone on the team for contributing to this. So today we will kind of go through a usual overview of estimates of females with cubs and trend occupancy within the ecosystem of females with young, mortalities, overview of all mortalities, and then we'll look at some additional data collections. And, again, keep in mind, this is all preliminary data. This is still subject to revisions. For example, we might still have a few mortalities that come in the coming weeks. And Jennifer did a really nice job of talking about the conservation strategy yesterday. She showed some of these maps already. Here I'm gonna put some numbers on those areas. So we're all familiar with the ecosystem where the national parks are in with the green outline. The blue outline is the recovery zone or the primary conservation area in the listed scenario. And then our demographic monitoring area is about 50,000 square kilometers. So that's about the size of Vermont and New Hampshire combined. That's a pretty big area. We'll talk a little bit more about that demographic monitoring area, by the way, when we talk about past workshops, because that is a development that came out of the 2012 workshop. It's always helpful to look at occupied range in relation to these different boundaries. And our most recent estimate of occupied range, we do that on a 15-year running window of data. So we're using all the locational data we have from 2006 to 2020. Our occupied range estimate is now well over 70,000 square kilometers, and still continuing. We will do an update of that. By the way, we do one every 2 years, so we'll present another one. Hopefully have that available in early 2023 once we have all our 22 data collections cleaned up. So I just want to point out, how big of an area this really is. We're now covering basically 98% of the demographic monitoring area. So that is the monitoring area is the area where we're doing the primary data collections. And there's a few areas here that are not quite covered yet. Basically the winds are now covered, the gravelies and centennials, part of the rubies. We're basically covering all suitable habitat and what is officially defined by the Fish and Wildlife Service as suitable habitat and beyond. We see a lot of still continuing range expansion on the east end, but also basically all around the ecosystem. And since we're in Bozeman, just for reference, if you're in this portion of occupied range in the ecosystem, you're closer to Salt Lake City and Fort Collins than you are to Bozeman. So that gives you kind of an idea of the scale of things and how much things have changed. And that's the result of about 40% change in increase in occupied range on an annual basis. Just to put that in perspective a little bit with the entire lower 48. So these are the areas with the diagonal lines. Those are what we estimate as occupied range. And you see those for the Northern Continental Divide and Cabinet Jack Selkirk systems as well. The blue areas is something that the Fish and Wildlife Services have been working on in recent years. That is identifying what they call areas of maybe presence. So that's representing, that's not occupied range. I should emphasize that. The blue areas are outside occupied range are just verified observations assigned to hydrological units. So that's representing areas where bears might be present. So obviously, we're seeing a lot of potential for connectivity in the future here, as we predicted would happen a while ago, and we're still waiting for the genetic evidence of that. But some of these areas are following areas where we predicted those connections to occur. So that is encouraging. So if you look at this, for lower 48, this is a really promising picture of where we are with recovery. Okay, let's jump into the three demographic recovery criteria and see where we are on that for monitoring females with cubs of the year. That is our basic unit for monitoring population. We conduct observation flights. We have 54 units because of budget constraints and other issues. Normally we do 2 flights per year. We only were able to do 1 flight per unit, and we flew 36 units this year, and 18 were not flown. But most of these areas, we don't really get a lot of observations of females with cubs anyway. So it's not a good investment of our resources to do a lot of flight time in those areas. So the orange areas is where we did our observation flights. Then we look at observations of females with cubs, and we have the purple squares are ground observations, the circles, white and red, are aerial observations from our observation flights, and also we take advantage of observations from other aerial efforts by our partner agencies. So we had 205 total observations. Those then we apply that Knight et al. Rule set that uses distance criteria and other criteria to identify unique females with cubs. That's 60 within the entire ecosystem. And we get litter size estimates from that as well, from observing actual litters. But average litter size of 2, nothing unusual there. 57 of those were within the DMA, so we had 3 females with cubs that were completely outside the DMA, and we're seeing a little bit of a trend in that just goes along with range expansion, of course. So each of these different colored squares represents a unique female with cubs. So again, we're monitoring within the DMA, so that's the number that was actually within DMA, and just for reference, you know, we tend to look at longer time frames and see where observations come from. So when we look at unique females with cubs over time, and this is a 3-year time period over the last 3 years, we see really good coverage throughout the core of the ecosystem. That's a lot of solid evidence of reproductive females throughout the ecosystem. And you know, when you look at this, it's actually kind of surprising. We tend to think of the national parks as the areas with the highest density, and that's certainly true. But there are also areas outside the parks, I mean, especially on the eastern end. There's a lot of bears in these areas. So when we apply these observations to our estimates, we started basically with that 57 as a unique number of females with cubs in 2022. Some of those are only observed with telemetry, and the statisticians tell us that's a biased record, so you cannot really count those because you're already monitoring those. You cannot count those from your random observation process. So we take those out. So there were 8 females with cubs that were seen only through telemetry, and because that's a biased sample, we take those out. Then, so to this 49, we applied a what we call a Chow-2 estimator, which is just a correction for animals that we might not have seen. So that is actually accounting for bears we haven't seen. So that brings the estimate up to 59. And then, because these estimates tend to vary a lot over time, we apply a statistical technique called, reflects some of our recent enhancements to the technique called generalized additive models, which helps smooth that trend over time, also helps us detect changes in the trend. And so with that number, we arrive at 84 females with cubs of the year within the ecosystem. So with that number, it helps to look at trend over time. And as you can see, since 2001, we've seen, pretty steadily increasing trend, and it's slowing down a little bit towards the end. And indeed, when we look at the statistics of this last year, we didn't see any evidence of additional growth necessarily. Certainly no evidence of decline, but it's certainly a stable trend at this point. And that brings up the point, I think we need to recognize that in many areas, and we've been saying this for a while, in many areas of the ecosystem, we're seeing bears really reaching certainly local carrying capacity. So we're seeing increased density in areas, and we with a paper that we did with Dan Bjornley and colleagues in 2014, we developed a density index based on our capture and records. And when you look at kind of a decadal trend over time in that density index, the lighter colors represent areas of higher density. You see that, in 1990, you see more the darker colors. You see some of those getting to the lighter colors of yellow with increasing higher indicating higher density. You see also range expansion. And And again, some of these areas of highest densities are not necessarily in the parks. There are some areas in south and eastern portion of the ecosystem that have really high densities. And so in combination with that, we're seeing density, what we refer to as density dependent effects in the population. So we're seeing effects of that on cub survival, for example. In areas with higher densities, we see lower cub survival, and that has influence, of course, on the population trajectory. We're also starting to see some impacts of that on younger females, taking longer to attain their normal lean body mass in areas with higher density. And it's probably because of competition with other bears. So these are the type of things that are difficult to study. And in this case, because we have such a long-term and detailed data set, we are actually able to get at some of these patterns over time. So that's to say that, it's unrealistic to think that this population can grow forever. We are filling up the ecosystem. The core of the ecosystem is unlikely to see a lot more growth. We're still seeing quite a bit of growth on the outskirts and outside the DMA, but within the DMA, at some point, we should expect this population to start kind of oscillating around the long-term mean. We predicted that would happen back in 2016 with a paper we did, and I think we might be getting to that point. The second demographic recovery criterion is we're looking at the distribution of reproductive females. So that's not just looking at females with cubs in the year, but also females with yearlings and 2-year-olds. This is pretty quick. We tally those on a 6-year running average, and 18 of our bear management units within the recovery zone were occupied by females with offspring. So this is all good news and good distribution of reproductive females throughout the ecosystem. Then the third demographic criterion relates to mortality and mortality rates. And one thing I should point out is that we get really good collaboration from people out in the field, whether it's agency people or just people from the public that report mortalities. We feel that we get a really good reporting rate. When hunters are out there, see a dead animal or recreationists, we typically hear about that. So that is always helpful for our tallying and reporting. And we really hope that will continue into the future. Our known and probable mortalities are shown here in this map. We didn't have many mortalities this year. And I'll show you a little bit of a pattern over time, but there were only 27 within the DMA. 21 of those were human caused, and the long-term average of percentage of human caused mortalities is about 85%. 6 natural mortalities, and if you're a quick study, you realize that hey, some of these dots don't match up with these numbers, and that's because there's in some instances there's family groups, so there's the same locations for multiple animals, and you just can't see the different dots here. They're all on top of one. So it's not a mistake in the map. It's just that there's multiple records in one location. We had 13 mortalities outside the DMA, and I should probably point out this. We do have some natural mortalities both inside the parks and outside the parks. We had 13 mortalities outside the DMA. You can see those here, and all of those were human caused, including one quite south. And then we also occasionally get reports like someone finding a carcass that might represent a mortality from previous years. So we also tally those and add those to previous records. And there was one undetermined cause in the park, and this one, I believe, was likely an animal killed by another bear. Natural mortality. So when we look at those within the DMA, there's a bunch of numbers here by sex and age class, but it's actually, if you kind of summarize it, it's pretty simple. There's basically 9 independent age females, so those that are 2 years or older in these mortalities, in these 27 mortalities within the DMA. 9 independent age males, and then a total of 9 dependent young that we tally this year. And again, this is as of earlier in the month. There might still be some changes to that. In terms of the causes of those mortalities, this was a relatively low year, so we're not seeing huge patterns here, site conflicts within the demographic monitoring area. The highest category, we're relatively low on livestock related mortalities. Then we get quite a few natural mortalities as well this year. But this is the graph I mentioned earlier. Is kind of interesting to look at this pattern over time, and it shows you how sometimes what you think might be an outlier is not an outlier. And so what we have here is a cumulative number of count of mortalities for the entire system, not just DMA, for the entire ecosystem by week, starting in April. So you see, obviously they increase over time, and then whatever at the end of the year, what you end up is your total. And this is our line for this year. And so around this time in June, we were looking at these numbers and we were thinking, oh gosh, this is going to be a really big year for mortality. It was obviously an outlier at that point. And then suddenly something changed and mortalities dropped. And it ends up, if we don't get a lot more additional mortalities, we'll be in a year with well below average mortality count. So it just shows you that sometimes you got to be careful in extrapolating too far from some single observation somewhere, and that's true. Just like you see here, this was an odd year, and the more years you have, when you start filling in this distribution, and you're going to have some outliers every now and then. Doesn't mean that if it's high that the population is crashing or anything. It's just that's going to happen every now and then. So a little bit about some other monitoring data we collect. As you know, we collect a lot of other data that are relevant to our efforts. And really the captures and known fate monitoring are really the key portion of our monitoring program. We had quite a few captures this year, 96 total captures. You can see the research animals in the blue circles, and the red squares are management captures. So 60 research captures, 36 managements, representing 83 different bears. Always a little bit biased towards what males. So we had 26 females and then 53 males, and that represents 52 new bears. So on an annual basis, we've been averaging about 62%, 63% new captures every year. And we pointed this out in the past, that can only happen if you have a population where you see continuous recruitment of new animals into the population through reproduction. And so seeing that remain at that same high level gives us another metric of that gives us some confidence that this population is really doing well. We have our goal for monitoring. One goal for monitoring is to have at least 25 adult females on the air. And so we reached that. Not every female is monitored for the entire year. Sometimes we lose collars, etc. But we're doing well on that. So we totally monitored 112 different individuals. So lots of data going into this. And currently we have 73 bears on the air. And for once, no missing bears. So that's good too. We also look at body condition and genetic monitoring. Primary purpose, of course, for the genetic monitoring is to document if there's any natural integration of genes from outside the Yellowstone ecosystem. First, let's talk about percent body fat. We measure that through bioimpedance analysis, and it's always helpful to look at these patterns over time. Obviously. In May, early June, bears kind of have their low right coming out of the hibernation, coming out of emerging from their dens. Then they start gaining body fat over time. And for females, this threshold of 20% is kind of a critical threshold for reproduction. If they go into the den with at least 20% body fat, and they're not already encumbered by other offspring, they bred that summer, they likely to raise a successful litter of cubs. And so for most bears, we've reached that point around this June date that represents about 17th of August. With a few, there's a few bears here that were actually not quite at that thresholds, and that's one was an older female with two cubs, and one was a younger female, and then an old male that was roadkill near West Yellowstone. So those had some lower percent body fat, but the vast majority, already at 17th of August, we're reaching that critical level of 20% body fat at that time of year, and that's also an indication that they're finding the food resources. In terms of genetic monitoring, we have a large sample of that. 1,300 individuals that have been genotyped, and at this point, no evidence from that yet that we have introduction of non-GYE ancestry into the populations today, but we're continuing that monitoring. And that might relate to some of the discussion we'll have in a moment with the augmentation program. So in summary, we've been applying our enhanced, our refined Chow-2 methods to a number of females with cubs. That number was 84 in the ecosystem. As of this year, we're not seeing any statistical evidence of continuing growth. It looks like for this year, it's stable, and we'll see in the future years how that develops. From a mortality standpoint, the primary causes of mortality inside the DMA were site conflicts, natural mortalities, and we actually have 3 humane removals. And it's important to point out, that we're at a point now where about 33% of the mortalities are outside the DMA. We also do some food monitoring, through actual transect surveys for white-butt pine, for example. And that's slightly above average this year. Still getting comb production, and bears are still finding that. And then we're doing some more qualitative monitoring, and it looks like we at least localized the good berry productions, and we also had another good month. So from a food perspective, we're not seeing any major changes other than those that have already occurred with white-butt pine. And I want to remind people that our annual reports and technical reports are available from our website. Because of a peculiar issue with the USGS website, we cannot host our future report USGS website, so I'll be hosted on the IGBC website. So you can just go to IGBC online and find all our annual reports as well as other technical reports there as well. So you now have 2 places to go to. But for any annual reports in the future, they will be on the IGBC website from here on out. And with that, I would like to thank, for this portion of the presentation, I'd like to thank I made a count, 168 people. You can quickly check me if you want. 168 people contributed to our efforts this past year. Again, it's amazing how many people help us out and are interested in collecting information for us, and all the agencies that contribute to that, and the pilots and everyone else. It's a tremendous effort, and just thankful to be part of that, small part of that, and yeah, thank you everyone. A lot of people in this room are on this list. So, and before we jump into the workshop summary, maybe this is a good time to see if the committee has any questions about this year's status report. Now, it will become clear in a minute why I'm not presenting any total population estimates or mortality rates, because we are kind of in a transition towards an IPM approach, and so I should point that out, but we'll get to that in a minute. Any questions? Any additions from study team members? This might be another opportunity that if I missed something, feel free to jump in. If there's not, then we'll continue into a quick summary of our workshop. We had that Monday through Wednesday this week. And before I get into the details of that, we'll throw out this term vital rates a few times in summarizing the workshop. And what we mean with that's parameters that we use to derive estimates of total population size from those estimates of which out to number of females with cubs within the demographic monitoring. So when we say vital rates, we're talking about things like survival for different sex and age groups, reproduction, transition rates for females, reproductive transition rates. So whether a female without cubs next year has cubs, or a female with cubs has yearlings with them still the next year, those are what that refers to. We look at things like sex ratio and litter size to then from that estimate of one segment of the population derive a total population estimate. Just a little bit of background, this was certainly not the first demographic workshop that the study team has held. We've held others before. The last one was in 2012. And I just wanted to revisit that a little bit, just because those workshops are meaningful. They result in changes, both in our understanding of the population, but also result in changes towards management approaches and things like that. So the last in 2012, this is kind of a summary of the objectives. One objective was to revise the population estimation protocols, reevaluate mortality thresholds, and those were tasked by this committee, by the way, looking at geographic zoning of mortality thresholds and conduct a demographic review, which, to show you how well the system works, that was triggered by the monitoring protocol. That was the 2011, 2012 is the first time ever that the monitoring protocol at the time recognized that population growth was slowing down, and that triggered this review back in 2012. And some of the outcomes and implications of that work was that we looked at different ways to identify the unique females with cubs, to identify unique family groups, the clustering mechanisms and things like that. Consider those, ultimately abandoned some of those. We evaluated, didn't quite work out the way we thought it would. But from those efforts, we developed a new technique at the time. It was a mark resize technique using those observation flights that we, at the time, were doing 2 times a year. We revised the sustainable mortality thresholds at the time. They were initially 9%, those were revised to 7.6% for independent age females. That's also the point where we established the demographic monitoring area, because we realized, there's only so much area that we can cover with our monitoring program, and we drew those boundaries based on suitable habitat and areas where their presence is socially acceptable. And we also looked at a lot of the relationships between these vital rates like survival and reproduction and some intrinsic and extrinsic factors. And that's really where we started to get a better picture of some of these density dependent effects. That's where we realized that the density of the population is so high in some places that it's starting to affect things like cub survival. So for the 2022 workshop, your objectives were to review the demographic data, to update the vital rates. So that was a yes task, and update demographic parameters and estimates in the conservation strategy. There's a few other things that we evaluated. The ability of the monitoring program to detect population trends, that's still ongoing. And it also involved kind of a final evaluation of the integrated population models, or IPM, as a primary demographic monitoring tool. And as you recall, we reported on that at the Jackson meeting in spring. We did a more detailed report on population models, kind of reflect on how they work and what the benefits of those are. And so we had quite a bit of discussion on that. And again, this is something, these workshops we hold not with just our group, but a really important component of this is to invite external experts to provide their opinions and their experience to make our efforts better. You know, sometimes we all tend to get this tunnel vision, right? So we invite these external experts to get other ideas about how we might do things better in the future. So in fact, we have Josh Nowak here in the room. He was instrumental in developing our integrated population model together with Paul Lukacs at the University of Montana. Ryan Wilson from the Fish and Wildlife Service Polar Bear Program, Karen Rhodes from the USGS Polar Bear Program, Joseph Clark, who's done a lot of research on black bears in the southeastern United States. And then Dan Gormley, who is currently unaffiliated, but formerly with the Wyoming Game and Fish, and has a tremendous amount of knowledge about this system. And so they were really instrumental in helping us think differently about some of the pressing questions we're dealing with. Now, this is just a couple of days ago, so we don't have a full report, but some of the preliminary outcomes and implications from our work. With the vitals, when we're looking at vital rates, you know, we historically have done that for discrete time periods. So initially it was from 1983 to 2001 data. And for the last workshop, we used data from 2000 through 2011. But sometimes when you use these discrete time periods, you kind of start lagging behind when you apply those to the current estimates that you know might be 5, 10 years later. So we are trying to move away from those discrete time periods of vital rates to derive total population estimates and instead use what we refer to as moving windows for 15 years of data collections. And that's a much smoother approach over time to then derive your total population estimates. When we review these vital rates, you know, some things are changing in the ecosystem. You know, some vital rates remain pretty steady, but others like crop survival seem to be changing, declining, and we see again more evidence of density-dependent effects with probably infanticide by larger males playing a big role. So we're seeing again the effects of when you see effects like that, that's an indicator to me that we have reached biological recovery. Only populations that are close to carrying capacity would show these type of patterns. So this should not be taken as a negative. It's a measure of success. And I just didn't realize it, but I made my next point already. So yeah, we see further evidence of density-dependent effects. We published on that already back in 2014, 2016, but we're seeing more of that and I think in more areas as well. And again, that relates back to those changes in density maps that I showed you earlier. And then finally, you know, our IPM is almost ready for prime time for implementation. There's a few things that we still need to work on, and Josh will be helping us with that. But I think we're really pretty close to implementing that. And to me, that really represents a huge improvement in our monitoring program. This is the approach that Polar Bear program is using, and many other monitoring programs have switched to this technique, because this is kind of the emerging new technologies that enhance monitoring and really integrate all data collections into a single unified system. So a little bit more about that before I end up. This is not something we're jumping into. This has been a long process. You know, I think it's fair to say that some of us were kind of skeptical about this initially, but we wanted to be very rigorous before we adapted to something new like this. And so we started this investigation in 2018, and we are now at a point where we should be ready to start implementing this next year, and so spring of 2023. We are working on preparing a publication for peer-reviewed journal on this. I think that is important that we document, especially if we make a change in the monitoring program. But I also realize that, implementation of IPM would likely require some further, consideration of revisions to the 2016 conservation strategy. I should point out that fundamentally, it's really, the IPM would represent an extension of our current efforts. The one important input to the IPM would still be our estimates of unique females with cubs of the year based on that child two, refined child two estimator. So a lot of things will, in terms of the data collection, will remain the same. Just the analytical component and the ability to put all the data sources together in one framework, unifying framework, is what allows for more reliable and flexible estimation in the future. So with that, I will leave you with a jumpy happy bear picture. Do you have any questions about our workshop and anything else?
No questions for Frank? Okay. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you.
So that's a good jumping off point for our next topic here. And as Frank just mentioned, implementation of an IPM would require further revision of the 2016 conservation strategy. And one of the small groups that we've had working recently is in fact working on updates to the conservation strategy. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rick, to talk about where we go from here.
Yeah, so we talked about the conservation strategy and where the small team is at in terms of making revisions. And so I think as you heard from Frank, there's more work to be done on chapter 2. And so what I would like to do, I think a good path forward is for that small team that's been working on the conservation strategy to stay together and to work with Frank and a subset of the study team to get together after the first of the year and look at continue to work together on revising that the meaty part of chapter 2. So I think it would be nice if we could get the subcommittee to agree to accept the changes in the document in the conservation strategy for all those chapters except for chapter 2. Those minor edits and revisions that are in there are really more just clarifications, minor edits, updates, etc. If we can just hit accept on the track changes for those changes, I think then we'd have a cleaner document to continue to work with as we further refine chapter 2. So would everybody be in agreement with that, Pat? Okay, excellent. Well, Frank and I will work together to get something set up for the first of the year so we can continue to work on chapter 2. And in the meantime, we'll probably ask Kathleen for some help. She's the track changes expert. And she gave me a bad look. That's going to cost me, I know, but anyway, I'll get even with you. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. So why don't we moved along pretty quickly there. So let's revisit the genetic augmentation conversation from yesterday prior to moving on to a break. Ken, you want to pick that up? Sure. Thank you.
Great, some exercise, yeah.
Okay, so, if you recall yesterday's discussion, yeah, talked about the proposed protocol. Obviously, the documents you got aren't all polished, but, I got some input, primarily from Idaho with some, mainly sort of, just wordsmithing edits. The one probably significant one as it applies to this group was, there's a sentence in there about, individual, augmentations being approved by this committee. And from a logistics standpoint, that's just not practical, so suggest taking out and the yes committee and just have it approved by the affected agencies or organizations. The other ones are just some cleanup stuff, so, I guess what I'd like to get out of here today is at least agreement from this group to move this on to the IGBC, recognizing we gotta polish it out, but it really, the concept and the pieces of it aren't gonna change in the sense of, the objective of it, the sideboards that are outlined in terms of landowner approvals and time you do it, animals, you those kinds of things, so. I guess I would see if anybody had any other concerns or suggestions. And if not, if you're good with what I just described, we can get a green light to move it forward.
And you're gonna put that blurb from the MOA in there?
Yeah, yeah, it needs, like I said, it needs some polishing, but it's. I don't want to get into group wordsmithing. Did anybody else have other concerns or suggestions? Mr. Chairman, I go to where we never make decisions in this group, so.
Let's make one. So, with that said, is there a motion to pass this on to the executive committee with the minor edits? So moved. By Idaho. So moved. There's one,
I second.
a second. Is there any against? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So moved. We'll pass that on to the executive committee with the edits.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, so it is 10 o'clock. Let's go ahead and take a 20-minute break. For those of you staying in this hotel, I do know that checkout is 11. So if you just need to get anything taken care of, then we'll meet back here up at 10:20.